Welcome, everyone, and you are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. On today's podcast, we'll be doing something a little bit new, and that's having a roundtable discussion about cybersecurity in the maritime space. Given the importance of cybersecurity in general, but a topic within our space, I wanted to bring together a few folks who've been involved in this process from a few different angles. But today, we're going to talk to three different folks, and we're going to see what they have to say. And it's a really interesting look. I'm not going to make the introductions, but instead, I'm going to just hand it over to three folks: Rae Baker, Craig Wooldridge, and Cris DeWitt. And first, we're going to talk to Rae. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself, Rae.
Yeah, so my name is Rae Baker. I am a senior OSINT analyst for a large consulting firm. I have worked in open source intelligence for about 5 years now, with a heavy focus on maritime. I am also a private investigator in my state and the co-founder of Case Scenarios OSINT Training. I fell into maritime kind of by accident. I had been switching gears from graphic design, which is what I did for 15 years, into cybersecurity, basically for more money and more of a technical challenge. And I would write blogs to kind of teach myself techniques, and I would pick random things that I thought were interesting. And one week I just picked maritime and lots of people loved it. From there, I kind of dove in and I really loved it, and the rest is history. I mean, I do a lot of maritime work. My day-to-day kind of job is tracking vessels, kind of looking around the ocean, looking for things that are interesting, tying vessels to people to companies and people to social media, kind of the whole gamut of open source intelligence, which is publicly available information. So anybody can gather it, anybody has access to it, and you can gather information from that, you enrich it with other data, you analyze it, and you create intelligence from it.
That is super interesting. And yeah, we've seen the rise in that, especially as, mainly AIS, but we could talk about other sources as well, becomes more and more popular. People are tracking everything from sanctioned ships, which it sounds like you're doing, and those sorts of things. We'll definitely get more into that in a minute. Craig, off to you here. You're gonna have the dubious distinction of well, we'll let you explain your background here.
Yeah, dubious might be the word. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Craig Wooldridge. I am the certification manager for a cyber assurance scheme called Maritime Cyber Baseline, which is run through the company I work for called IASME Consortium, based in central England in the UK, in the Malvern Hills of all places. So for a cyber one, we're on top of hills, which is a bit strange, but there you go. I was a serving police officer, police detective for 30 years. 19 of those I specialised in fraud investigations, working for the West Midlands Economic Crime Unit, the West Midlands Regional Organised Crime Unit, and a stint for 18 months with the City of London Police, where I worked on the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau. A bit like Rae, really, I fell into the maritime cyber baseline after coming to IASME 3 years ago to develop a new fraud prevention baseline scheme that we're doing. So at the moment, my sort of day-to-day activities are based within the business development team at IASME, and I, in a nutshell, look after the running of Maritime Cyber Baseline, liaising with new and old clients, managing the online assessment portal, and also attending international maritime events to promote the MCB scheme. So I'm not the techie person as such, but I do all the background work to get people assessed. And obviously we use what we call certification bodies to do those assessments on our behalf as well. And those people are the techie people. So that's me in a nutshell.
That's really fantastic, and the dubious distinction is the first ex-police officer we've had. At least I think. I don't know, in the 4 dozen plus 5 dozen guests that we've had. Maybe you're the first one there. And we're gonna wrap up the intros with Cris DeWitt.
Yeah, so Cris DeWitt, and I always think I have a pretty cool job until I hear about some of these other ones out there, and the things people have done. Both Rae and Craig have had amazing backgrounds in the way they came to this, and I think I'm in that same bowl of soup where just a bunch of things converged at some point in my life, and cybersecurity is what popped out at the other end. So it's been a great ride. I started out as a very young man doing summers abroad on a research ship. So while my friends were tooting around Europe and with Eurail passes and seeing the sights, I was on a ship and we were doing this research work, which was quite interesting. I started playing around with the computers on board that and just kind of taught myself what they did, and then came back and switched my career from petroleum engineering over to electrical, and then did some time in semiconductor manufacturing, which was really interesting. Taught me a lot about process and how important that is to create quality things. Then I started a little company and sold it to the American Bureau of Shipping and worked for them for a little while. And during that time, we developed their cybersecurity classification guidance and standards. And then when I left, I just started consulting to companies primarily in standards work, but I'm fairly T-shaped. As a nerd, technically I've gone down the path of understanding, protocols that float around on a ship and ways to compromise those systems. But not just a ship. I've automated a lawnmower and have another one that's halfway done, done in air quotes. And now I work a lot with policies and procedures, and then I have to think through what people have designed in the architectures of these systems, and then help my clients report back for tender offers or any kind of certification they might be going after. For the owners now, a real nice spot to be in for me and for leveraging my background. Thanks for having us all here today.
Oh, this is fantastic. I love to hear how people got into maritime. I mean, my story, and many of you have listened to the podcast. I basically went to a future student day at the high school where I went, and they had SUNY Maritime. I grew up in New York. SUNY is an acronym for State University of New York. There's lots of other SUNY schools. We went onto the campus, which turned out to be about 10 miles from where my dad grew up. He had no idea what it was. And I walked on campus. I'm like, yeah, this is what I want to do. Yeah, I want to go on ships, and love the idea of international trade, and everything is connected through ships. And this is pre-internet or very early internet. And, the whole concept of being able to move goods from A to B was awesome. Being able to drive a ship, so to speak, and do that was awesome. I do not have a single engineering bone in my body. Just ask my wife as we try to put together IKEA furniture. She will be the first one to tell you that you should not be an engineer, and I agree with her. So this is all great. And I love the fact that you guys are all on. Cris, let's start with you. I mean, we have a lot of cybersecurity, especially now, has been, I think, heightened in the last few years, certainly of late. What would you say, given your view on from the owner side, what would you say the state of play is there in terms of cybersecurity, maybe just awareness and implementation? And you can look at it from any way, but given your owner's side, how would you look on that?
There's several, depending on what kind of owner you are, and what kind of fleet you manage. As you know, bulkers are very different than an offshore drilling ship, and the different hazards that are involved in the offshore drilling ship are quite different than most of the bulkers, or especially an inland freighter, for example. So a lot of it depends on the owner, and then matching what the standards bodies come up with and classification societies come up with to their business needs. A lot of stuff is just, quite frankly, unaffordable when you translate cybersecurity controls from the shore to a ship. We have certainly the issues of latency with satellites, and low Earth orbit constellations now are making that better, but it's still not what you would expect. It's a T1 versus gigabit Ethernet on Google Fiber, for example. So I think a lot of companies struggle with how to choose what they do. Some of them have a budget that they've thought about, and others have an event that hit them, and now they got to think about it. And as we all know, the proactive way is much less expensive than the reactive way. But I think owners are looking for companies to help them decide those things. I heard something on one of your other podcasts. Maybe it was something about, if somebody tells me they can save me 50% of my security budget, I'm like, yeah, they're out the door. Forget it. I think it was your CEO you had on.
Yeah,
And,
it was a fuel efficiency. He said, if anybody says over
Yeah.
10%, I kick them out because I know it's not realistic, which is kind of funny, which is kind of funny. So you basically are running up against the same sort of sentiment with it for ship owners.
Certainly, there's a lot of claims to that effect, that they'll save you X amount of money or keep 100% of your ship secure, whatever that means. It's just like, I think most of the supply chain of the industry can do a better job at describing things once they know your environment. So I think there's a little bit of a dance there, right? There's the fast dance where you go and you learn what the environment's about, and then you move into the slow dance where you get a little closer and start thinking about, well, what's the network architecture here? Is it flat network or is it segmented? Because both of those are very expensive propositions. One to go build, the other to go support. So I think that the suppliers can do a better job of that. Now, on the other side of things, our makers in the shipping industry, the people that build the things that push and pump and heat and lift, historically have just lived in their own little bubble. Think about cranes, for example. They lived in their own little bubble. They didn't do much, but now they have cranes being remotely controlled from shoreside facilities for ship-to-shore cranes, for example. Even on board, you have a little wireless remote RC airplane style control of a crane, and even that needs to be secured. So I think the digitalization of our industry is something to think about, and for those that are on that journey, I think it really helps us a lot from the owner side to know what the next few steps are, not just how do we fix the problem we have today. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling, but I think that may have answered your question.
That's a good point, Craig. What do you think? I mean, you're looking at the certification, you're going out and talking to people, and you're looking at it from kind of a certification baseline point of view. Well, how would you kind of look at that? Take Chris's point as well.
Taking on Chris's point about digitalization, I think from what we're seeing, it's the digital threat that's the main thing at the moment. So digital threats have sort of undergone a profound transformation over the past few decades, really. Obviously driven by technological advancements and digital interconnectedness and various factors, including availability of powerful hacking tools, the proliferation of cybercrime forums, and the rise of state-sponsored hacking groups. So it's that digital threat that's sort of driven this evolution, really. And obviously from talking to different people when they're doing the sort of verified assessments and looking at their sort of controls they have in place to reduce the risk of a cyber attack occurring on board the vessel. Obviously there's many sort of attack vendors now, including malware, ransomware, DDoS attacks. But the thing with maritime, it's heightened by the proliferation of sort of operation technology, IT and IoT, the Internet of Things as well. So cyber criminals see now, I think, the maritime sector as a new and profitable target, not only for prospects of substantial ransom payments, for instance, but also due to the escalating attention and sensitivities of charterers and port authorities to potential reputational damage. So really, in response, maritime organisations can't now really afford to rely solely on basic cybersecurity measures. They must address the financial pressures as such involved in safeguarding their digital assets and networks. So that's where we're seeing is the threat, that digital threat, the escalation of those digital threats.
Sort of brings us into a little bit the world, Rae, that you live in, assessing that, you're keeping track and using open source, but also it sounds like you do a little bit of that, looking at what those threats could be. And I'm sure that preoccupies you on a lot of different levels.
Yeah, you both talked about threats. So I am the threat that you're worrying about.
That's ominous. I love that, man. I am the threat. So far, I've had a couple of really good quotes this year on my podcast. This may be top 3, Rae. I kind of
I'm honored. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
what I mean by that really is that I am mimicking the threat that you are all fighting to protect your organizations against. So in adversary intelligence, I am playing the adversary. I'm not a pen tester, so I am not logging into your systems. I'm not using passwords or hacking anything, but I'm finding your data that's available, your contracts, your people who are on your vessels, posting on social media. And I think overall there is a lack of understanding in the industry about how all these little bits of data connect. So it seems innocuous that someone is posting from the ship an Instagram picture, or there's contracts out there that show the entire blueprints of a vessel, which is true. I have found that. Or all of the IoT stuff that is connected to these vessels. You mentioned cranes. I mean, I look at cranes daily.
That's the big
And
thing.
how they
That's
connect.
in the big thing in the news now, right? With the cranes that were built
Yes.
in China, and now
Yeah.
everybody's
The
hitting.
KPMG cranes. Yes.
Yeah, they're taking the pause on it a little bit. At least people are starting to think twice at a minimum.
Yes, and those cranes, the blueprints are all online for those cranes too. All the cameras and everything that are on them. Lots of people think they are secure. Everything is in a bubble, but that information is out there. That data is surprisingly easily accessible. Lots of people think they're very secure, but there are little bits of data that I can find to connect the dots to something bigger. It might be a wording in a contract, or a contract that mentions a certain product that you use at your port or on your ship. And then I can go and do a Google search and I can find all of the specs for that thing. And then I can go to look up vulnerabilities for that thing and see, oh, it runs on this OS and this has 5 vulnerabilities. That would be my method of attack. So I think what's interesting is this is what the nation state hackers are doing. And, this is how you protect against these things, by knowing what we would target.
Interesting thing I'm going to point out. Cris said ZPMC, not KPMG.
Yeah, I'm in the consulting world,
which I think is great. We have a little chat here.
ZPMC. I did spend a vast amount of time on those cranes, so I should have known that.
That's all right. I thought KPMG. I'm like, wow, they're into cranes. Yeah, I'll let it go.
I mean, they probably are.
It sounds like you in another life could have worked with Craig as a police officer, because you're putting all the things together.
I love true crime.
I love true crimes. Yeah. So let me just kind of pivot that question, and we could start with you, Rae. Is this something that should keep people up at night, or is it, or what do you think?
I think so. I mean, you have very large companies like Maersk who have already been attacked once, and lots of this stuff is old on these vessels. It's not new. These systems, the way they work, have been around for a while. I feel like there are loads of ways to access them and information that is out there. It's hard to keep track of them all. I get that. You can't plug every hole, but I do think there should be an overall awareness of how these little pieces of data can affect your company, your business, your cybersecurity.
Cris, moving it to you as kind of wearing the owner's hat, how do you take an approach on this sort of what Rae is saying? Because I think it's really fascinating. And I think, one of the things that I've always been good at more on the commercial side is connecting the dots, or on a personal side, I've always been good on kind of, hey, you should talk to this person because they have a real interesting same thread, which is basically what Rae is doing in the kind of looking for vulnerabilities. Cris, what would you say to ship owners and so on? How would you help them craft their approach based on what Rae's saying?
I think there's multiple perspectives when you come to being the defender. And one of those is that what Rae described, which is she's going out there, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rae, but you're going out there and you're finding all these open source faults that people are making where they're putting the public information on display. There's a picture of 2 guys, doing a selfie on the bridge of a ship, and right behind them is the Wi-Fi password, right? We've seen that in a lot of things.
Yep.
So, but it gets more detailed than that. Certainly, when we thought about Stuxnet and the Iranian nuclear program, a lot of the information they found was from a newscast and the system that was behind them, right? They could see, oh, that's this manufacturer of software, and this is they could look up the vulnerabilities that have been discovered on that software and then craft an attack. I will say that it's not as easy as it sounds. You certainly got to have nation-state capabilities to exploit most of the operational technologies on ships, unless you've done something silly like connected your ship directly to the internet. And by now, the International Maritime Organization and class societies have come up with guidance and rules. Some of these become mandatory in July this year for ships that are built on or after July. So they're getting their act together, but it's not a perfect world, and not everybody has the budget to put in all the defenses. So it ends up being a risk analysis, and risk is at the heart of every single thing we do. I think it may be on your side as an ex-police officer, Craig, where you look at guns, guards, and gates as a certain set of risk scenarios. And we do the same thing. And there's a great corollary between that and cybersecurity. Probably why you're good at what you do is because you understand those interactions between them. And then the communication of that risk. And, how big is it? Well, nation state attacking an inland freighter that's moving, I don't know, garbage from point A to point B is probably not the target of a nation state. So they may have to worry less about somebody seeking out of certain vulnerability on a control system, on their steerage system, navigation system, whatever it is, as opposed to maybe somebody that traverses through the Red Sea on a regular basis. So I think there's perspectives, and it's not just a one size fits all. That's the long answer to your question.
Well, that's a great answer, and I push it over now to Craig. Given that you're trying to get baselines and things like that, do you run into these same sort of kind of challenges, whether it's cost, whether it's understanding how everything is connected? I mean, when you go out, you start to talk to, because we all got to make money in this business. I mean, we all make it different ways. I used to make it by banging my head against the wall, and you guys do it maybe same sort of way. Craig, talk to me a little bit about how, when you go in and you say, look, this is what we're trying to do, baseline. Do you find that people are still kind of challenging and the thoughts behind it?
Yeah, I think obviously one of the main challenges is the IT and OT security crossover. And obviously when clients come to us and they want to have their sort of ship assessed, it's that complexity around the IT and OT systems, especially the OT side. That is the biggest sort of downfall we've seen, is what is covered and what's connected to the IT and the OT. And taking it back to what Rae was saying and what Cris has said about when you say if you're a ship owner or charterer and what keeps you awake at night, obviously from our perspective, what we see more than anything is the main worry to me, if I was the owner or charter, would be your crew. And I think really it's from the captain downwards to whoever and how many crew are on whatever size ship, being it a cargo vessel or even down to a super yacht or a ferry. It's looking at crew training. So firstly, sort of, do they have the training? If so, how often are they trained? What responsibilities do they have in terms of cyber activity? Also in terms of what access do they have to computers, the IT, the OT systems on board? Simple things like, do they regularly change passwords? Do they have their own passwords? As we all know, sharing, and Cris says about the picture and the back that shows the thing. There's so many people that share a common password. It's quite frightening, really. And also, you've got to take consideration like turnover of crew, and also when a member of crew leaves, what does the owner or charterer have in place to remove the crew member's access to the cyber workings of that ship? And I think the main thing there that I'm getting to as well is what precautions has the owner put in place to stop the insider threat? And this is probably what Rae sees as well, because we could have the insider threat being disgruntled members of staff who may have been sacked or not given a position they wanted. So get a little bit of revenge back, all the way up to the bad actor actually being placed on board the ship to implement malicious software that can be then used to place an attack on the ship once that person leaves. That's sort of the main thing from our perspective when we're trying to get people to answer a verified assessment about their ship. And obviously we are looking at owners, builders and charterers and that sort of people. That's the main thing we see as a lack, is training.
This is also why I think Craig's background is so important, because I mentioned that corollary between physical security and cybersecurity. And, having people leave packages, drugs or whatever on board a ship by some insider that was paid to go do it. We have the same thing on cybersecurity. Either A, they're injecting with malicious code with the USB that we're told to plug in, or, just any host of a number of things where that insider threat exists. We change our crews out on these ships quite often, more regularly than almost any industry I've ever been in. That's something for sure to watch, but I think your background's great, because you're used to looking for that sort of stuff.
And Rae, you're looking for that as well, I imagine.
I am. And one of the biggest, I say this at the risk of making my job harder, is content creation is a big one. Like, everybody wants to be the next TikTok star or, YouTuber. And a lot of the information I find is from people doing full walkthroughs of these vessels. I mean, like, everything.
Yeah.
And panels, and I forget who said, the names of the systems in the background. I mean, I'm taking notes the whole time, and then, Googling them afterwards, because I don't know. I mean, I don't know I'm not a ship I've never been on a ship.
We
I
got to
will
get
admit
you on.
that freely.
Somebody's got to get Rae on a ship, man. We get you down there for where you are. We'll figure out.
I feel like I've been on a lot of ships.
But there you go. There you go.
Right. Question for you. Have you ever run across a system that you looked up on a ship, you found the user guide, and in the user guide, it tells you what the default password is?
Yes. Many times.
There you go.
Yeah.
Wow.
That is rampant in this
And
industry.
I don't know if the default password has been changed, but 50-50 shot, it probably has not. So at that point, I stop and I report it, but other people have not. They would just log in.
Craig's out there looking for somebody that has a policy in place that says go change the default passwords when you deliver a ship, take delivery, and probably afterwards at some point. The issue we have in maritime systems, especially on the OT side, are those systems, some of them, they don't even have a password. It's just open.
Yeah, it's a long cry. I can't say anything about computers on ships, because the last ship I was on was in 1997, and I'm not sure if it had a computer. And I'll tell you about the computers on board. I purchased a laptop, I brought it on board, and basically I became the default report writer. So what happened was I ended up writing all the reports that the captain wanted to write on overtime. So I basically paid for my laptop, which was really super expensive, not like it is now, within a half a trip, because the captain would be like, here, just write these reports. You can sit in your stateroom, not hooked up to anything. I'd have to go take the floppy disk and take it and plug it in or plug it in to the printer. And that was it. There was this was before email, before everything. A question that comes up, and this is a little bit of a balancing act question that I want to ask you guys. One of the problems that shipping has is we have this sea blindness problem. What do I mean? Everybody knows shipping is there. They really don't know what it does. They really don't care about it until you don't get toilet paper at Walmart. Right. And I always use that example because of COVID. People were stabbing people, at least here in the US, because they ran out of toilet paper. Right. Okay. Maybe it wasn't true. Maybe it was. But there was a lack. So, one way is you joke around, you talk about using social media to make shipping on board and ashore more attractive career, because there is a very real threat looming, not one we've talked about today, a threat of lack of mariners, not just here in the United States, but globally. How do we balance kind of getting the word on the street that this is a great industry? And I look at the three of you and the diverse backgrounds and how you got here, that you've stumbled on it and go, wow, this is a really cool place. I don't want to leave, and come from three very different backgrounds and staying in it, so we all don't have to go to the boat school like I did. Rae, start off, because you're looking from the outside all the time. What advice would you give people to be like, hey, you could do this, but don't do that? How do we approach that?
getting the word out that these are careers that people can do.
Getting a word that and making it attractive and increasing bandwidth. I forgot that part, and doing all the things to making it a better industry as well, which does take it to a part like social media and stuff, and having a presence, and or at least looking at stuff online. How do we balance that out?
I think overall, no one knows about maritime. I mean,
Right.
Before I got into it, I didn't know anything about it. It's very insular. I think unless you're from the Navy or you somehow fall into it, like everyone I have ever met, you don't know it exists. I don't know the solution to that. I think that maybe.
Well, I guess my question is, as people start to elevate the maritime name in outside and using social media, how do we at the same time protect ourselves? In other words, like what you said, having the third assistant engineer walk around a container ship for 20 minutes and you're writing stuff down, that's not where we want to be. How do we get that kind of allow that to happen to raise profile of maritime without endangering what's going on?
I think for bigger organizations, it's easier. You can have a marketing team and you can set policies on social media, just like you do at an everyday company, on what they post, what they say, what's in the background. Smaller companies, it's going to be harder just because they might not know what can be picked up out of these images. It is always a balancing game, not just in maritime, but every company, because when I'm not doing maritime work, I'm doing regular organizations and I'm doing the exact same thing. They're posting their computers with the passwords. It has to be a policy that the company sets and then enforces and takes those things down as soon as they come up. So somebody has to be dedicated to looking through their social media and monitoring it. That's a big job, especially with a huge company. I mean, if you're looking at like Maersk, or I keep using Maersk, that's the one I can think of right now. Millions of employees. How do you keep track of all their social media? I don't know. I'm not a marketing person, but yeah. I think base level, you have to have policies and kind of stick to them and monitor traffic and what's posted.
Gotcha. Craig, you're shaking your head up and down. Have you kind of experienced this as well?
Just, from obviously coming from a fraud investigation background, really. Same as Rae, really, not coming from the background. When I came into this area of work and the maritime sector, it's quite plain to see that, how would you explain it? It's a father to son sector in a lot of areas, where father's the captain of the ship and then son comes on, son takes over. So it's that continual sort of family orientated sector. So trying to attract new people in may be hard if you don't know the sector. And to some degree, I have to say, coming from outside the sector, it's hard to get in with some people and actually speak to them, because you haven't got the experience that they've got going on a ship every day of their life, sort of thing. But picking up on Rae, and I say from the fraud investigation side, is every company should have some sort of fraud policy and a fraud investigation plan. And I think that's obviously on a ship itself or any vessel, that's what you need to have in place in case it goes wrong when you're out at sea or in a harbour and then suddenly somebody switches your engines off. You need to firstly have the policy to show people, because a fraud policy should be open to everybody, supply chain, clients, employees themselves. Everyone should be able to see that fraud policy. And that really what you're putting out there is you're saying, this is what we do to prevent fraud. But then what you should do, if anything does go wrong, is have a fraud investigation plan in place as well. A lot of people don't. And then obviously when it comes to them actually being attacked, they haven't got a clue what to do from that very important golden hour when it first happens.
It's interesting because my background on shipping, even though it was a while ago, you always kind of have accident investigations, and it's just an extension. To me, it smells just like an extension of that in a good way. Cris, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. So the IMO did something really smart in one of their meetings. They said that you need to manage, they highly recommend that you manage cyber risk in the safety management system on a ship. And in the safety management system, there's almost always something called an emergency response, your emergency plans and procedures. So in that response, you can treat cybersecurity just like anything else, right? So call it a fire, call it a cyber attack, doesn't matter. Those mariners drill for and are trained for how to respond to the outage of any critical function or safety critical function on the ship. If your ECDIS goes out, for example, this is a navigational system that does all the charts and shows them where to go, overlays the radar screen on a display. If that goes away entirely, they can always look out the window. If it's night, they can always, get out binoculars and look for buoys if they're in close quarters.
Use sextants and navigate by
if
the
they
stars.
still teach that, that would be
they
great.
do. They do. I checked. They do. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank God.
I learned that. Yeah.
It hasn't gone the way of cursive writing, I guess. But
Yeah.
so I think they are very skilled at responding to, at least from what I've seen, any emergency that would cause a safety event on board. Now the question becomes: did you lose a bunch of money because you're late, or did you make the ship unsafe because your ballast control system was impacted? But I would say that there's usually what they call a man in the middle, or a person in the middle of the activity. And attacking these vessels is a lot harder if they've done the basics. Meaning, if they've done the basics, it's really difficult to get command and control at a certain geographic location at a certain time and make something go boom. Really, really hard. So you think about all that operational technology. Most of those makers now are putting firewalls in the way of anybody because they don't want their type approved system to be affected. And so it's the ones where they either chose not to, or didn't have the money to, or just have not been attentive to doing the basics. The basics are out there. I'm sure Craig's solution addresses, do you have or not have some of these things? Rae is out there, and what I think is a really interesting space, because we don't have a lot of open source intelligence going on other than our information sharing societies and groups. There's not a lot of companies that have that in place that I know of. So it'll be really interesting to see here over the next 2, 3, 5 years how that helps or doesn't help somebody to go in and cause damage to the ship operation. Now, shore-based, right, there's going to be some hole in the armor, and it's just dependent on how fast they can react to it if they have those plans in place. Ship's a little different. They'll make it safe. The maritime that are on board will make it safe.
I'm hearing a challenge.
Yeah. Then the last bit part of that comment is probably around we have a lot of people on board our ships, and if you're following the industry, we're moving towards autonomous ships in some way, or even minimally manned ships, and these are great directions to go. You think about the insider threat. If you have 20 people on board, or 2, how much did you just mitigate the insider threat if there's only 2? So I think it's going to be a great, next few years, especially with AI taking off like it has, and some of those fun and games.
Go ahead. I do want to get wrapped up here because I'm not Joe Rogan. Somebody asked me I should be like Joe Rogan and do 3 hours of a podcast. I said my head would fall off. Forget about what you think about the guy, whatever. Hey, listen, if they pay me $200 million, maybe I will speak for 3-4 hours a day. Go ahead, Craig. I'll let what I'd like to do is let everybody get like a minute of a last word. So, Craig, go ahead. You're about to speak.
Yeah, I was just going to put it out to Chris and Rae and yourself, obviously, Christopher. Obviously, the IMO brought out the guidelines on cybersecurity risk management on board ships and vessels, and also IMO Resolution 428(98), which requires ship owners and managers to assess cyber risk and implement relevant measures across all functions of their safety management system, as Chris picked up on. My only concern is with a lot of these documentations and resolutions is they are only guidelines, and some requirements like the IACS are bringing out UR 26 and 27 for new ships in July. What we'd like to see, and I'm sure, is some sort of mandatory requirement, even if it's, as you say, a baseline, is somewhere where the IMO, in joint with BIMCO and other people like that, actually put something out there that says you must do this, rather than have a look at this and think about implementing. I think there's that need, The only thing is, as I'm learning, it's a very, very big organisation.
Right. Yeah, it
With
is. And you got a lot of,
a hell of
yeah,
a lot of ships out there. If it can be done, I don't know, but I do think they should be focusing on some sort of baseline that can be achievable for any vessel.
Rae, anything to add as a last thought there for that, or something you want to add?
Oh, to this specific question,
Or in general, your closing thought.
my closing thought. I guess my hope is that just by talking about what we look for in open source intelligence, that it creates some sort of awareness in shipping and maritime in general as to how easy it is to work with your public data to make connections and pull intelligence from it, whether it's tracking or just your social media that you're posting online or your contracting details or even your company website listing all the people you work with. I can use that. So if I can use it, so can the adversary. So just kind of a general awareness.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think you brought out, kind of you, Cris, or you, Craig, that said that we just don't use a lot of open source intelligence in the vernacular. I haven't heard a lot of it. Now, I don't go looking for it, but I haven't heard a lot of it. Cris, anything last minute there?
Many people have argued with me about this point,
Ooh, we like
and I think that's okay.
controversy.
It's not that big of a deal. But what I would say is that cybersecurity to me is not complicated or complex. It may be getting that way with things we don't know, and the idea of AI and neural networks and ... Insert buzzword here. But it is very, very tedious. And what I find is that while I can go and look up vulnerabilities on systems, if I'm chasing vulnerabilities for all the OT systems on my ship, then I have to worry about type approvals and things like that to even touch those and fix them. And so what my approach has come to fairly recently in the past 3-4 years is that the modeling of the threats and implementing some of the things we know in the safety world, hazards and identification of hazards and HAZOPs. That model seems to be much more suited to practicality of implementing things that really put defenses in place that are worth the cost, so to speak. So all I'm saying is, if you can take a threat model, handful of those, 15 or 20, you've probably figured out 99% of the things that could go wrong on a ship. And then you work through those barriers to those hazards on board. Think about safety, not just, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Yeah, I think wrapping your head around that is a good way to do it, because you can get lost on a ship in chasing vulnerabilities. You never get them fixed in time. But go ahead, Rae.
I just wanted to kind of play off of what you said there.
Sure.
Overall, it's not that deep, right? If you look at threat actors, they're not putting in tons of hours trying to hack into these systems. They're finding your default passwords. They're talking to somebody, phishing you. I mean, it's very basic. It's not deep. I think if you protect the basics, you're already ahead of the game.
Yeah, you're right. If you've only got to pull a few controls in place for the hacker to move on to somebody else. It's a bit like online fraud when somebody rings up pretending to be the bank and speaks to a vulnerable person. If that person starts to argue with them or even says, well, I'm going to phone this number before I speak to you, they'll move on.
Right.
So they won't ever try to keep breaking something if you've put something in place. There's a lot of people out there who haven't got anything in place, who are the easy targets. If you can put some controls in place, that hacker will move on.
As we wrap up, I start to thinking about like kind of the summary, and I think we have to be aware as an industry, and I think we are being aware. But I think, like you said, Craig, and all three of you have kind of pointed out, we could use systems already in place, like the ship safety system and other things already in place. Do what we're doing, extend it to that, and do a lot of the basics, because then it would hopefully move people on and put policies in place, as you said, Rae, especially around social media and other things. You shouldn't be walking around with a phone and live streaming a bridge tour unless it's controlled, and like you said, with marketing. Well, this was an absolutely fantastic a roundtable discussion. I want to thank everybody for coming on. I know you're all busy. You all have jobs. I appreciate you guys coming on. So thank you very much. And, happy, good luck securing and all that good stuff. And maybe we'll do a follow-up in a year or two and see, did it get any better or did it actually get worse? Hopefully it got better. So everybody, thank you guys for coming on.
Thanks very much for having us on. Cheers.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.